Welcome to another episode of Curiosities Unlocked, where we will be counting down true crime stories that happen on Halloween. For number 10, we have the girl that went missing on Halloween. Cindy Song was born in South Korea as Hung Jong Song. In the mid-90s, Cindy moved to Virginia to live with her aunt and uncle to attend school in America. She was accepted into Pennsylvania State University after high school, where she majored in integrative arts, a course that combined engineering, communications, and science. It's Halloween, and Cindy decided to take a break from her studies and go to a costume party at the Players nightclub with two close friends, and they stayed until around 2 a.m. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? Right. Cindy's friend dropped her off at her apartment around 4 a.m. that morning. After that, that was the last time that Cindy was seen. Cindy's roommate returned from visiting family later that day and wasn't concerned about Cindy not being home. The door was locked, nothing was looked out of place. But after 3 days, her friends became concerned about her lack of contact and called the police, and that happened around the 4th of November. What we know is that Cindy definitely made it back to her apartment because her backpack was there, her eyelashes that she wore with her bunny costume, and her phone was also in her backpack. Now, the backpack she had was also worn at this Halloween party, so we know she made it back home. It's believed that Cindy went to a nearby 24-hour store after she had dropped her things off, as her keys and purse were also missing. Now, a few days after Cindy was reported missing, an eyewitness came forward to tell the police that a woman who looked like Cindy was dragged kicking and screaming into a car in Philadelphia's Chinatown district, nearly 200 miles away. The witness said that the woman was forced into the vehicle by a man who yelled at the witness to leave them alone. In 2003, bank robber and serial killer Hugo Selesky was brought in as a suspect in Cindy's disappearance. An informant told police that Selesky had abducted a woman along with his accomplice, Michael Kurkowski, and kept her in a walk-in freezer until she died. Selesky admitted to abducting Cindy, but told investigators that Kurkowski was the one who killed her and kept the bunny ears she was wearing as a souvenir. Selesky told police that he and his accomplice mistook Cindy for a sex worker and kidnapped her. He said that Cindy's body was buried in Lewins County, Pennsylvania. Police searched Selesky's home, but they was astonished to discover more than one dead body laying underground. They found a series of dead bodies in the backyard. Oh, did I mention that Cindy's body was not amongst the bodies that they found? And the police also had to let Selesky go because they could not prove his involvement in the case. And did I mention that Cindy's case is still unsolved? Coming in at number 9, let's talk about the man that ruined Halloween, Candyman. Halloween is known to be scary for kids. It's more obvious. But in the 1970s, Halloween turned out to be an 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien's last nightmare. After returning home from a long night full of treats, his father Ronald gave him one last piece of candy, a pixie stick, which Timothy ate instantly. Within moments, the boy was vomiting and he died on his way to the hospital. It was concluded that his father coated the candy with cyanide. In short, Ronald was in debt and had taken out a life insurance policy on his children. Poor soul. Well, he was indeed found guilty and a year later was executed by lethal injection. Parents, do not forget to have a look at your kids' treats before they get a mouthful of sweetness. Coming in at number 8, we're going to talk about being stalked for Halloween. Now, most of us don't remember Halloween 2011, but for Taylor Von Deest's family, it's been a fixed date. Taylor, age 18, dressed up as a zombie in what was going to be her last trick-or-treat since she was getting older. She left the house on foot around 6 p.m., walked to friends' home Taylor texted her friend as she walked, and her last text read, "being creeped," meaning she was being followed. Witnesses found her barely alive around 8:30 p.m. on the side of the railroad tracks. Taylor had scratched her attacker, obtaining his DNA under her fingernail. It was this evidence that helped find and eventually convict the man that was responsible for her horrific death. The man was Matthew Forster. He was around 25, 26, but he had come to the small town looking for sex that night before fleeing the area and was going into hiding after the attack. He was arrested for Taylor's murder on April of 2012 in a motel in Ontario. In May of 2014, he was found guilty of first-degree murder, which carries a mandatory life sentence in Canada with no chance of parole for a minimum of 25 years. Forster's father, 60-year-old Stephen Forster, was also arrested in relation to this murder, charged as an accessory to murder after the fact due to evidence uncovered by the police that he had lied for his son. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Forster had the nerve to say that he was looking for consensual sex. Sir, this is no way to look for consensual sex by stalking a very young girl. Coming in at number 7, we're going to talk about the Halloween prank that went wrong. Throwing eggs on Halloween night is typical and a harmless prank, but in 1998 it turned deadly when a 21-year-old Bronx resident, Carl Jackson, and his girlfriend went to pick up her 8-year-old son from a party. He was a quiet young man and usually avoided going out on Halloween, not because he thought it was too dangerous, but he wanted to kind of avoid some of the mess that goes on Halloween. So as they were driving by to go pick up her son, a few pranksters threw eggs at the car. This would make anyone mad and upset. So Carl stopped his vehicle and got out of the car. He yelled at the pranksters to stop, and in response, one of the teenagers pulled out a gun and shot him through the head. He died instantly. 17-year-old Curtis Sterling was charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. He was convicted and was serving 20 years. He has since been released, and I was not able to find any information of what he's doing today. Now, according to the New York Times, he would receive, while he was in jail, he would receive mail every Halloween that read, "I'm glad you're still there," from Jackson's mother. Next up, we have the innocent killer. Now, this is sort of a twisted story because hear me out when I say that on Halloween 1975, Martha Moxley, 15, failed to show up at her home after roaming her neighborhood on Halloween in Greenwich with friends. Her body is later found bludgeoned and stabbed, half hidden behind pine trees. A broken golf club found nearby is believed to have been used in the killing. Now, this murder rattles the town, which is considered extremely safe. Martha was last seen alive on the lawn of her friend Michael, age 15, and Thomas Sacco, age 17. They were brothers. The brothers are nephews of Ethel Sacco Kennedy, the widow of Robert F. Kennedy. The police traced the golf club used in the murder to a collection that the Sacco family owned. So Thomas, the older brother, and another man are considered suspects and both pass lie detectors. So they are let go. For 2 years, Michael, he attends a private institution school which catered to children with mental health and substance abuse problems. One day, while there, he blurted out during his group therapy session that he had killed Miss Moxley. Now, he confessed to it, but the school still denied that such confession occurred. So they just said that that didn't happen. Interestingly, 25 years later, Michael, who was 15 at the time of the slaying, was convicted of the murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. It's disturbing how he maintained his innocence all this time. So, to keep a long story short, Michael was convicted in 2002 of the 1975 murder of his neighbor, Martha Moxley. His conviction was vacated by the Connecticut Supreme Court in 2018. And in October of 2020, his case was reopened. Now, today, Michael walks out of the Connecticut courthouse a free man after prosecutors announced that they do not have enough evidence to try him again. Martha's mother. So now Michael is out free and living life. In the end, Martha's mom, Miss Moxley, stated that I will never forget the day they found him guilty. It gave me all of the justice that I needed. Coming in at number 5, we have The Crime of Passion. In 1957, Peter Fabiano, the 35 owner of a hair salon, had been awakened to answer his doorbell just after 11 p.m. on Halloween night. He was a tad bit annoyed, thinking, it's late, people knocking on my door, but he took the candy to the door. But the person standing at the door wasn't a child at all, but they were handing something within a brown paper bag. And before Peter could respond, a gunshot rang, and Peter was lying on the floor. The perpetrator ran and jumped into a getaway car and sped off almost immediately. Betty, Peter's wife, found him with a bullet lodged beneath his heart. He died of massive blood loss and never regained consciousness. Betty was adamant that there was only one person that would wish harm on her husband, and that person was no other than the family friend Joan Rabel. Joan was picked up and questioned by the police, but they weren't able to get a confession from her, and there was no evidence to tie her to the case, so she was released. The murder weapon was found in a department store locker that had been registered to a lab assistant, 42-year-old Golden Pizer. Pizer was arrested by police on November the 12th of 1957. She had confessed to the murder, claiming that Joan had convinced her to shoot Peter, stating, "She told me that Mr. Fabiano was a vile, evil man who destroyed everything around him. She told me that he mistreated his wife and he was dealing narcotics." Peter had hired Joan to work at one of his salons. And during that time, him and Betty had gotten married. So Joan was a big part of their lives. So much to the fact that when Peter and Betty were having marital problems and Betty moved out, she moved in with Joan. And her and Joan became really close. Really close. And I think Joan had a slight obsession with Betty. When it came time for the trial, both were sentenced to 5 years in prison. Now, I was unable to find out how long Joan actually served, but Pizer was released from prison in 1971. She died in Los Angeles County in 1998 at the age of 83. And Betty, after Peter's death, sold the beauty salon and remarried in 1966. She lived a pretty long life, passing away at the age of 81 in California. Coming in at number 4, Halloween candy. We all know how big Halloween candy is, but is it worth killing someone over? Here is an exact case of someone stabbing a woman over candy in 2001. Lyndall Peoples bought candy to give out for trick-or-treating, as everyone does. But when one bag was missing, he accused Maria Adams as being the person who stole his candy. And he went into a rage. Peter used several steak knives from his kitchen to attack Maria Adams. And in defense, she threw several plates at him, causing a large gash over his head. All because he thought that she had stole his candy. Now, doctors found that Peter suffered from schizoaffective disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, cognitive disorder, cocaine abuse. Whew, that was a lot. But they also found that he was fit to stand trial. He was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the death of Maria Adams and sentenced to 30 years in prison. All for a bag of candy. Coming in at number 1, 2, 3, The Unexpected Halloween with a Twist. Sometime during the early morning of Halloween hours of 1981, a Manhattan couple, Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman, were murdered in their apartment, which was located near Greenwich Village. The couple was severely beaten before being shot in the head execution style, and the apartment was completely ransacked as though someone was looking for something. Sisman was a photographer but was rumored to be involved in drugs, so the authorities initially believed that that was the motive for the killings. However, the case took a bizarre turn when a prison informant claimed that one of his fellow inmates had somehow predicted the crime weeks before it happened. And that inmate that had that information weeks before the crime even happened was no other than the notorious David Brockovich, the son of Sam. What? Did I mention that they were shot before they were beaten? So someone shot them, then beat them. This case still remains unsolved. And if you haven't watched The Sons of Sam, it touches on this. And at the end, if you stay to the end, you will see how it all comes together. Coming in at number 2. Please don't go to the wrong house on Halloween. Please. In 1992, a Japanese exchange student, Yoshihiro Hattori, and please forgive me if I butchered that, he went out on Halloween night to find himself lost in a neighborhood. He ended up at the wrong address and knocked on the door several times. When he got no answer, he walked back to his car, but suddenly the door opens to this house. Before he can explain anything, the property owner, Rodney Pierce, fatally shot him. Upon investigation, Rodney claims that he had been scared and he thought the student was trespassing on his property with criminal intent. The trial lasted for 7 days, and the jury came back after deliberating for only 3 hours with a not guilty verdict. The courtroom erupted in cheers of excitement because many people didn't think that Rodney should have been found guilty. In a later civil action, however, the court found that Rodney was liable to the Hattori's parent for $650,000 in damages, which they used to establish 2 charitable funds in their son's name, one to fund U.S. high school students wishing to visit Japan, and 1 to fund organizations that lobby for gun control. And finally, we are at number 1. No, that's 2. Number 1, we have William Linsky. William Linsky will have you side-eyeing your kids. For real. On Halloween of 2010, 16-year-old Devin Griffin returned from church to his 2-story home in Ottawa County, Ohio. When Devin entered the home, he went straight to his room to play video games, completely unaware of what horror had early unfolded in his house. When he went into his mother's room later on, he was met by a gruesome scene. His mother, Susan Linsky, and her husband, William Linsky, were lying in a puddle of blood on their bed. In another room lay the lifeless body of his brother, Derek Griffin. They had all been shot and then brutally bludgeoned with a claw hammer. At first, Devin believed it to be a Halloween prank. He described it as something out of a haunted house. An investigation quickly led to William Linsky's son, William Linsky Jr., who had fled to the family's cottage in Carroll County, Ohio, following the slayings. After the triple homicide, friends and family members told the authorities about the violent outburst, how Bill Sr. had to kick his son out of the house after William Jr. attacked his stepmother, Susan, in the shower. Neighbors had stated that he had been skipping school and misbehaving. Susan attempted to impose order in the house, and her stepson resented that. In exchange for his guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. And without shedding a tear, William Jr. told the courtroom that he could not give a solid motivation behind the murders of his father, stepmother, and stepbrother. I can't really explain why this all had to happen, but I think most of it all had to do with my mental illness. In 2011, William Linsky Jr. was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In 2015, William Linsky Jr. committed suicide in prison. Well, now those were some really deep story. But that brings me to the end of this video. And I would like to thank you for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe to the video. Please put comments below to let me know what you thought. And I'll see you next time on Curiosities Unlocked.